Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Ray from Moss Pawn and Gun, and today we got a really cool how-to episode for you today. We're going to be installing the brand new to the market rock solid scout mount for the Mosin again, and what it does is it actually replaces your rear leaf sight assembly, and then you drill and tap 2 holes right here in the receiver, and you've got your nice solid scout mount where you can still load the gun with stripper clips. You don't have to use a bent bolt handle if you don't want to. And best of all, the way that the holes are laid out, you actually have the same pilot holes that you use for a normal rock solid mount, which is this one.
So happen to be the same as the ATI bolt pattern as well. So if you've got either of those 2 mounts already installed on your gun, you could take that mount off and easily install one of the rock solid mounts that they've just come out with. It's a really nice unit. Looks like it's going to be real solid and relatively straightforward to install.
Certainly hope so. Well, we're going to get cracking on the installation. I'm going to narrate a bit, and Ray's going to work, and I like this kind of video.
It'll be pretty cool.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right, the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to disassemble your rifle as shown. You're going to remove it from the stock. You're going to need to take the rear leaf spring and rear sight assembly out of the rifle, which we've done. All you have to do is drive out the pin seen on the side of the base, and the unit will drop out, and you won't have any problems there. The mount itself actually interfaces with a step on the front of the mount in front of the set screw that interfaces with the front of the base, and that's where its stopping point is. The rear of the mount has 2 holes which get drilled in the top of the receiver, and you can see on the back of the mount and in unison with the receiver that you have plenty of room to fit the stripper clip in there to feed the gun with a stripper clip. There's a set screw in the center of the mount that actually adjusts for the height and level of the mount itself. What you're going to do is you're going to put the mount into the gun, get it squared up with the front of the sight base nice and tight where it stops, and then you're going to take something, you're going to mark where your holes are supposed to be. And that's going to give you an indication of where you're going to need to drill your holes.
At this point, I've got the mount fairly level, holding it tightly against the receiver, adjusting the set screw here so that there's almost no play up and down. You don't want it to be high, but at the same time, you want to run the screw down until it just touches the inside of the rear sight base so that there's no noticeable up and down movement. And that's going to get you pretty close. At this point, I'm going to make sure that the mount is fully forward, and then we're going to clamp this down nice and tight so that it's adjusted against the flat surface on the bottom of the receiver and the flat surface on the top of the mount. And that way we can mark our 2 holes here for drilling and tapping. All right, at this point we've got the receiver and the mount clamped up between the parallel jaws of the vise. What that's going to do is use the flat top of the mount and the flat bottom of the receiver to put these 2 in the same plane. Now, this doesn't account for any anomalies that might be built into the barrels. These things are not always perfectly straight. The other way that you could do this would be to set this up in a machine with a laser bore sighter, make sure that the laser is level, and then do the same thing with the top of your mount. And at that point, you would have a more square arrangement, but for the most part, most of you guys are not going to have that set up at home. We do have that set up, but we're doing this as a do-it-yourself installation. 99% of the times these things will go together just fine without any issues whatsoever. At this point, we're going to find a transfer punch that's the same size diameter as the inner hole of the mount, and we're going to transfer this hole to the receiver.
The way that we're presenting this particular video is in a way that a lot of you home do-it-yourself types are going to be able to do it with common tools that are found around your shop. Most of you have a vise at the house, a lot of you have transfer punches, so this is an excellent way to accomplish this task with very little effort. And you know it's going to be mechanically straight because you're using the flats on the receiver.
All right, we got the one hole marked that we'll be able to drill and tap in our fixture, and we'll get that done, and then we'll go back and do the second hole. That way you've got it rigidly mounted, and the second hole will have to be in line if you do it correctly.
Now normally when you're drilling holes in an action of a rifle, they have a few specialized fixtures that you can buy. One of them is the Forster Universal Drilling and Tap Fixture, and it's designed with popular spaces in mind and to clamp the action up rigidly. This is one way that you can do it if you don't own the fixture. The fixture itself is about a $350 item or more, and the overarms and other tooling for the fixture can actually be pretty pricey as well. So this is an option for some of you. If you don't want to buy the fixture, you can definitely do it like this.
One thing that I've noticed on this particular gun is that the rear sight base and the flats of the receiver bottom are not in the same plane. The barrel itself is overclocked probably about 4 degrees. To get this to mount up correctly, the only way to really do it and have it look right and look down the barrel the way the sight base is set up is to actually mount it with the sight base in mind and not with the flats of the receiver in mind. This is probably going to be one of those things that some of you will run into just because of the way these Mosins are put together. They're not necessarily meant to be a sniper rifle by any means. They were put together under the duress of war, so there's going to be a lot of anomalies and a lot of variations you're going to find in these guns. This particular gun we're going to clamp up with the rail set up against the front or the rear sight base, and that's going to be our mark. The rest of it's just going to have to fall into place as it will.
All right, what Ray has done is he's re-indicated the spot that he's going to drill his hole using the flats on the base and not the flats on the bottom of the receiver. The barrel is slightly overclocked, so the hole is going to be about 4 degrees from where it was. So bear that in mind when you guys are doing this work, that these receivers and actions can be a little bit off due to the wartime manufacturing nature of these items. You can see Ray is just drilling this using nothing more than a hand drill and a vise. This is perfectly acceptable, but make sure that you're drilling straight, take your time and pay attention to what you're doing, and you won't have any problems. What Ray's doing here is he's lubricating his tap. It's a 10x32 tap, and we're going to go ahead and get this hole tapped here. Then what we can actually do if we want is we can install the front screw on the mount and then drill through or mark the mount in a rigid manner if we'd like to. If you ever hear a tap squeak, you always want to be careful. You should never hear your tap squeak. You should never feel it rub or squeak. Generally, when you're running in a tap, you'll go in a few turns, back it off a half a turn here or there. It just depends on how hard the metal is. I mean, Mosin receivers really are not that hard compared to other types of receivers. Like a Mauser receiver are typically pretty hard, and they need to be annealed usually.
You'll find sometimes too that the sharpness of the tap will make a difference. Once they start squeaking, it's generally time to replace the tap or set it aside for softer metals. All right, we got that first hole drilled and tapped. We're going to install the mount using the front screw, and then we're going to transfer the second screw hole using the mount itself as a guide. We're going to go ahead and set the mount in place, install the front screw here. Kim's kind enough to send you a Allen key to install this with. down, sitting pretty rigid already just with one single screw in it. Let's see how that's sitting. Looks good. All right, I'm going to grab a transfer punch here and transfer that hole over. That transferred really nicely. Pop this back off and drill that rear hole.
You know, it's really amazing what a gunsmith can get done in their shop with a bare minimal amount of tools. You know, any job is easy with the right tools, and with the right amount of know-how, you can really get by with minimal amount. We normally set up a drill and tap fixture to do this type of work, but we're demonstrating it in this manner again to show you that it can be done at home relatively easily. And make sure that you're using some form of eye protection. Anytime you're drilling holes, you're moving metal, you definitely want to make sure your eyes are protected. You screw around and get a piece of metal stuck in your eye, it's going to be a bad day.
I'm going to degrease these holes so that when I put Loctite in there, that stuff won't have to contend with the oils.
All right, at this point we're going to go ahead and tighten down the screws on the mount, make sure everything fits nicely, and we're also going to check the length of the screws because the action screws that he sends you for the mount are going to need to be trimmed. And we'll show you a real easy method for trimming those here in a moment.
For shortening screws, I found this method works really well, especially if you've got a head of the screw that's got a parallel sides like these cap screws do. You can just chuck them up in your drill motor and spin them against either a grinding wheel or a belt sander, and particular screw here is only going to remove about 1/8 of an inch, and then we're going to match the longer screw to that short one once we get it cut down. Leaves a nice clean surface cut, and depending on what kind of screw you're dealing with and how much you're shortening, they go pretty quickly. This one's going to take a little bit more, and I've got a heavier cutting wheel that I'll use on this one. Let's check the length of this first. That makes for a nice clean cut. You don't have to really do anything to touch it up other than maybe just to break the edge a little bit for it to start easily in the hole, but just check it in the hole before you try to mount it, just to make sure that the threads aren't boogered up by any on the edges there. Easy enough to clean up if you have to. All right, we've got both of our screws shortened and both holes drilled and tapped and ready to mount this rock solid Scout mount. We're going to go ahead and lay it in place. I've got Loctite for the 2 screws. We're going to put some blue Loctite on that. That way you can get them back out later. When shortening the screws, you'll notice that you've got a little bit more meat to work with on the front than you do in the rear without protruding. So one screw is going to be about 1/16 of an inch longer than the other screw if you get full contact with these. If you get a little less than full contact, don't worry. Just try to keep as much as possible without protruding into the action. Those are down nice and solid. One thing we have left to do now is to go ahead and check the bolt clearance, make sure that it runs in and out of the action without any problems. Should go in, close, open, no problem. All right, set that back aside. The next thing we're going to do is drill the 2 holes for the front that correspond to the pivot pin for the rear sight leaf. And we're going to check, make sure that we're not in a bind here. We've got this set screw at this point. We're going to loosen that up. And what I might do, thinking about putting the scope on this platform, putting my bore sighter in the gun and bore sighting it before I do this, because at this point I can still adjust up and down some. If the mount has enough flexibility where you can use this as a jack screw if it needs to come up, or you can clamp it down when you drill your holes. And then once you get your screws in there, you can use that as a bias screw to tighten everything up. So we're going to do that first. I'm going to set a scope up on it. We're going to zero it. It's a brand new Leopold scope that hasn't been touched yet. So we're going to put that on and check the zero, see where we're at. All right, we just took and bore sighted this particular scope to the bore axis of this rifle. And if you watch closely at this junction here, you can see where this mount has some flex to it. We found that to get this to zero without moving the scope at all as far as the vertical, we only needed to squeeze it down about 1/16 of an inch. And what I'm going to do is run the set screw out until it touches with just that much pressure, and once it's set there, I'm going to clamp it solid, and then I'm going to mark my 2 holes and drill and insert the screws on that while it's all set up rigidly. That should leave us with pretty much vertical zero, so the scope has its full adjustability. The one thing you could do with this, because it is a scout mount, it's probably not going to be necessary, but you could include a certain amount of declination if you needed extra range for a rifle like this by pulling the mount down even farther so that you could have more vertical adjustment in your scope, just like putting a 10 or a 20 MOA base on a Remington or anything else. You could easily do that here. With the hole drilled about 2/3 of the way through, you can go ahead and start your roll pin. There are a few different ways to mount this. You could use screws, you could use hard pin or a roll pin, but the way I recommend doing it is using a either reusing the sight base pin, which would require having the metric drill bit the correct size to drill through the mount, but you could reuse the hard pin that came out of your rear sight leaf. The other one would be to step up to a more common SAE size, which I think 1/8 inch would be the next step up, and you could put a 1/8 inch roll pin in, which is what we're going to be doing here. That I think is a lot more rigid a setup than the screws would be. All right, get yourself started on one side, that way you can release. After you drill 2/3 of the way through, you can release this and flip it over without losing your center. Reclamp it on the other side and go ahead and finish your drilling operations. Just don't drill through your roll pin that you've already put in there. And at this point, you just drive your pin in and you're done.
Clean look.
Clean, solid, easily replaced. There we go. Set up and ready to go. Now all we need to do is mount the scope, take it out and blast with it a little bit.
I think we'll do that in a future video. Let's go ahead and assemble the rifle, show the finished product.
Let's do it.
All right, people, that's pretty much our rock solid installation video. Hopefully you guys gleaned some knowledge from the video other than just the knowledge of installing the mount itself. A lot of good little gunsmithing tips in there that Ray and myself provided. We're going to take this rig out and do some shooting with it at some point, see how well it does. Very cool setup, and we appreciate you guys watching today.
Yeah, you guys, if you have any suggestions or anything in the future that you might want to see, just shoot us an email or, send us a little message or whatever. We'll take a look at it and see if it might be something we can work in.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Yes, have a good one.